Caitlin Clark never signed up to carry an entire ecosystem, yet the numbers make it unavoidable. When she isn't on the floor, or even in the building, the audience disappears. That reality has become impossible to ignore as viewership across the WNBA's newest ventures collapses in real time. The experiment was supposed to prove the game could stand on innovation alone. Instead, Unrivaled landed on national television to an audience so small it raised alarms across the sport. With barely 40,000 viewers tuning in on TNT, the drop wasn't subtle, it was catastrophic. No Clark, no surge. No surge, no leverage. And quietly, the league's bargaining position began to crumble. What makes this moment so dangerous is its timing. As collective bargaining negotiations intensify, the data now tells a brutal story. If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe. Interest wasn't growing broadly. It was concentrating around a few irreplaceable personalities. Paige Bueckers symbolizes the next wave, but potential doesn't pay media rights fees. Analysts, commentators, and voices like the Joe Rogan Experience have zeroed in on the same contradiction. Players want to be paid like a league with mass appeal, while the audience metrics say otherwise. Without Clark anchoring the spotlight, the league's growth narrative fractures, and every demand at the negotiation table gets harder to justify. The numbers don't whisper. They scream. A league that was marketed as the future of women's basketball just collapsed in front of everyone in real time. Nearly 70% of its audience vanished compared to the year before. Games that were supposed to feel massive, experimental, and culture-shifting barely cracked 40,000 viewers on major television. This wasn't a streaming test run. This was TNT. This was supposed to matter. And yet, the silence around Unrivaled says everything. Heavy investment, recognizable players, new rules, new branding, and endless hype couldn't hold attention for more than a few weeks. What was sold as momentum turned out to be temporary curiosity, the kind that disappears once the novelty wears off. The league didn't just underperform. It exposed a problem the WNBA has been trying not to confront out loud. Because when the audience leaves this fast, it forces a brutal question. Was the growth ever real? The answer becomes uncomfortable when one name keeps coming up: Caitlin Clark. Every spike in interest over the last year tracks back to her presence. Ratings rose when she played. Engagement exploded when her games carried stakes and storylines. And when she wasn't there, the floor fell out. Unrivaled launched without her, and the results were immediate. No sustained buzz. No viral moments that carried over week to week. No reason for casual fans to stay invested. The league found out the hard way that star power isn't optional. It's structural. This wasn't about disrespecting the players who did participate. It was about acknowledging reality. Viewers didn't show up because the emotional hook was gone. The story people were following had ended, and nothing replaced it. That absence isn't accidental. Clark didn't join Unrivaled, and the reasoning didn't need to be spelled out. Injury risk matters. Career longevity matters. When the financial upside doesn't match the physical risk, elite players hesitate. That hesitation costs leagues more than they admit. Because without Clark, Unrivaled wasn't a must-watch product. It was a test of whether the league itself, stripped of its biggest draw, could stand on its own. The answer came back quickly and loudly. This is where the narrative gets dangerous for the WNBA. Not because one player chose not to participate, but because her absence revealed how thin the foundation really is. Paige Bueckers enters the conversation here not as a solution, but as a reflection of the pressure building inside the sport. Her name, her talent, her visibility all matter, but the expectation quietly forming around her is heavy, almost desperate. There's a growing sense that someone needs to pick up the torch. That someone needs to fill the emotional vacuum left when Clark steps away from a spotlight moment. And that's where the phrase "save us" starts circulating, not officially, but culturally. That kind of pressure doesn't come from success. It comes from instability. What makes this collapse harder to spin is the data. Previous seasons leaned on inflated metrics. Group watch parties counted as viewership. Multiple people viewing on a single screen were treated as equal to individual engagement. It made the numbers look healthier than they were. Unrivaled didn't benefit from that cushion. The ratings reflected real behavior, individual choices. People either tuned in or they didn't, and most didn't. This stripped away the illusion that interest was steadily growing. It revealed that last year's surge was conditional. It depended on specific faces, rivalries, and moments that felt culturally relevant. Once those disappeared, so did the others. There's a visible emotional shift when the conversation turns back to Clark. Not because she owes the league anything, but because the league appears to need her more than she needs it. That imbalance is the story no one wants a headline. The sadness isn't personal. It's systemic. A league shouldn't hinge as heavily on one player's availability. But right now it does. And everyone knows it. Fans sense it. Executives fear it. Players feel it during negotiations. This timing couldn't be worse. Collective bargaining negotiations are approaching, and players are pushing for higher salaries, better benefits, and stronger protections. On paper, the demands make sense. In practice, the leverage just evaporated. Owners don't negotiate off optimism. They negotiate off numbers. And the numbers coming out of Unrivaled weaken every argument about sustained growth. They suggest that value is concentrated, not distributed. When a league's audience collapses without one star, it reshapes every financial conversation behind closed doors. This is where Bueckers becomes symbolic again, not as a replacement, but as part of a looming question. Can new stars carry narratives the way Clark did? Can they create emotional investment that lasts longer than a season? So far, the league hasn't proven it can manufacture that kind of connection. It happens organically or not at all, and forced elevation rarely works. Expectations alone don't build viewership. Stories do. Unrivaled was supposed to solve that. New format, new energy, new stakes. Instead, it became a case study in what happens when innovation launches without demand. The product wasn't enough. The audience didn't stay. And now the league is left explaining why a heavily promoted experiment couldn't hold even a fraction of last year's attention. This isn't just about one failed venture. It's about credibility. About whether future projects will be met with enthusiasm or skepticism. Everything now points toward 2025. That season isn't just another chapter. It's a test, a referendum on whether the WNBA can grow beyond moment-driven success. If new stars don't emerge with real narratives, if emotional investment isn't rebuilt, and if engagement continues to depend on a single name, the decline won't stop here. And viewers know it. They've already shown what happens when the story disappears. If you're watching this unfold and have thoughts on where the league goes next, make sure to drop them in the comments. If this breakdown helped you see the situation more clearly, hit like, share it with someone following the league closely, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. The quiet around Unrivaled didn't fade slowly. It dropped off a cliff. One week there was curiosity, conversation, and cautious optimism. The next, there was nothing. No carryover discussion. No must-watch energy. No sense that people were rearranging their schedules to tune in. When viewership hovers around 40,000 on a major network, that's not a fluctuation. That's a verdict. And it landed hard because this wasn't a low-budget experiment. This was supposed to be proof of concept. A signal to sponsors, broadcasters, and investors that women's basketball could sustain multiple high-level products at once. Instead, it showed how fragile interest still is when it's not anchored to the right story. The collapse didn't just hurt Unrivaled. It cast a shadow over everything connected to it. The pattern is impossible to ignore. When Caitlin Clark is present, attention follows. When she's not, interest thins out fast. That's not an insult to the league. It's a data point. And data points don't care about intentions or effort. Last year's surge wasn't built on abstract appreciation for the game. It was built on moments, on rivalries, on someone casual fans could instantly recognize and emotionally invest in. Clark became the entry point. Take that away, and the funnel collapses. That's what Unrivaled learned in real time. The audience didn't transfer their attention just because the product existed. Clark's decision to sit out wasn't framed as rebellion or rejection. It was practical. Injury risk is real. Careers are short, and when a league hasn't proven long-term stability, players protect themselves first. That calculation makes sense. What doesn't make sense is expecting the same level of attention without her involvement. The league didn't lose viewers because Clark opted out. It lost viewers because her presence had been doing more heavy lifting than anyone wanted to admit. That reality is uncomfortable, but avoiding it only makes the problem worse. This is where Paige Bueckers keeps getting pulled into the conversation. Not by choice, but by circumstance. She represents potential, a future face, a possible bridge to the next wave of interest. But potential doesn't replace momentum, and it doesn't guarantee engagement. Fans don't just show up because someone is talented. They show up when the story feels urgent and personal. Right now, the urgency feels forced, and fans can tell the difference. The inflated metrics of the past only deepen the credibility gap. When group viewing parties were counted as individual viewers, it created a false sense of security. It suggested growth that wasn't actually happening at scale. Unrivaled stripped that away. No padding, no creative accounting, just raw engagement. And the results didn't align with the league's public optimism. This matters because perception shapes negotiation power. When numbers fall apart under scrutiny, confidence from partners disappears. There's an emotional undercurrent to all of this that's hard to ignore. Fans aren't angry. They're disappointed. Disappointed that something promising couldn't hold their attention. Disappointed that the excitement felt temporary instead of sustainable. That sadness often gets projected onto Clark, unfairly, as if she's responsible for carrying an entire ecosystem on her shoulders. She isn't. But the fact that people feel that way says a lot about the league's current position. Dependence is never a healthy look. As negotiations approach, the timing becomes brutal. Players are asking for more money, better benefits, and long-term security. All reasonable demands. But leverage depends on proof of value. And right now, the most recent proof points in the opposite direction. Owners can point to Unrivaled and say the audience isn't there without specific stars. That makes every demand harder to justify. This isn't about fairness. It's about bargaining power. And power follows numbers. The pressure on emerging stars quietly intensifies here. Not because they're failing, but because expectations are being accelerated. Fans want someone to recreate what felt organic last year. That rarely works on command. Storylines can't be rushed. Emotional investment can't be manufactured overnight. And trying to force it often pushes audiences away instead of pulling them in. The league needs patience, but the business side doesn't always allow for it. Unrivaled now stands as a warning. Innovation alone doesn't equal engagement. New formats don't automatically create loyalty. And star ownership doesn't replace star visibility. Without sustained audience interest, even well-funded projects struggle to justify their existence. That's the lesson unfolding right now. The question isn't whether Unrivaled can recover. It's whether future projects will face skepticism before they even launch. Everything converges on 2025. That season will answer the question no one wants to ask directly. Was last year the beginning of something lasting, or a perfect storm that can't be replicated? If the league can't rebuild emotional investment beyond one or two names, the decline will continue. And if it does, it will have to do so honestly, without inflated numbers or forced narratives. At this point, the conversation around Unrivaled isn't about patience anymore. It's about honesty. When a league loses nearly 70% of its audience in a single year, that isn't a market correction. That's a warning signal. And the warning isn't subtle. It's telling everyone involved that whatever people thought they were building, the foundation wasn't as solid as it looked. The most revealing part is how fast interest dropped once the initial curiosity wore off. Viewers didn't gradually drift away. They left, and they didn't come back the following week. That behavior matters because it shows there wasn't emotional attachment. There was no reason to stay. That's not a marketing failure. That's a storytelling failure. Every time this gets uncomfortable, the conversation circles back to the same reality. Caitlin Clark wasn't just a participant in last year's surge. She was the engine. Her games created urgency. Her presence created stakes. People felt like something mattered when she played. Without her, Unrivaled didn't feel essential. It felt optional. And optional content doesn't survive on major networks. Fans don't rearrange their schedules for optional. This doesn't mean the league can't exist without Clark. It means it hasn't proven it can yet. Clark's absence also forced a reckoning about player priorities. Protecting health isn't controversial. It's expected. But when stars opt out of new ventures, it exposes how little margin for error the league has. There's no buffer. No deep bench of universally recognized names ready to absorb the attention drop. That's the risk of concentrating interest too narrowly. When one piece steps away, the entire structure shakes. And right now, the structure is shaking. Paige Bueckers keeps getting framed as the next answer, but that framing misses the point. This isn't about replacing one star with another. It's about whether the league can support multiple storylines at the same time. Bueckers has talent. That isn't in question. What's uncertain is whether the league can give fans a reason to care consistently, not just when a single name trends. Because the moment that pressure gets unfairly dumped on one player, the cycle repeats. The numbers don't just affect perception. They affect money. Media partners don't invest in potential. They invest in proven engagement. When a league can't sustain viewers, even with heavy promotion, it weakens every future pitch. Unrivaled was supposed to strengthen the league's negotiating position. Instead, it gave executives a fresh data set showing how quickly interest drops when star-driven narratives disappear. That's a brutal thing to walk into negotiations. There's a noticeable emotional fatigue among fans. Not outrage, not backlash. Fatigue. People wanted to believe last year marked a turning point. Something lasting. Something bigger than one season. Seeing that momentum stall feels deflating. And that disappointment often gets misdirected toward players who didn't sign up to be saviors. Clark didn't fail the league. The league leaned too heavily on her success. As collective bargaining talks approach, the imbalance becomes impossible to ignore. Players want growth reflected in their pay. Owners want proof that growth is real and repeatable. Right now, the most recent evidence undercuts the player's position. It suggests the audience isn't expanding organically. It's clustering around specific moments and personalities. That makes long-term commitments harder to justify, no matter how valid the demands are. For emerging stars, this creates an impossible environment. They're asked to perform, elevate ratings, and carry narratives before the infrastructure exists to support them. Fans sense the pressure. 2. When excitement feels forced, it doesn't land. Viewers disengage rather than lean in. The league doesn't need faster stars. It needs deeper stories. Unrivaled's failure isn't final, but it's instructive. It shows that innovation without emotional buy-in doesn't work, that branding can't replace connection, and that star power isn't a bonus. It's the baseline. Future projects will be judged against this outcome. Skepticism will come faster. Patience will be shorter. That's the cost of overpromising and underdelivering. All of this leads back to the same conclusion. The 2025 season isn't just another year. It's a referendum on storytelling, on star development, on whether the league can move beyond moment-driven success. If it can't, the decline will continue quietly, not with headlines, but with empty slots and shrinking attention. At this stage, the damage isn't hypothetical anymore. The league can't spin this as a slow rebuild or a long-term experiment. The numbers are already out there, and they tell a clear story. Viewership didn't dip. It collapsed. That kind of drop forces internal conversations no press release can smooth over. Unrivaled was meant to prove that women's basketball could sustain multiple high-profile products at the same time. Instead, it proved how dependent attention still is on very specific circumstances. When those circumstances disappear, so does the audience. That's not an opinion. That's what happened. The danger now is normalization. When low numbers stop shocking people, they start feeling inevitable. Caitlin Clark remains a reference point because the contrast is so stark. Her games created urgency. They felt like events. Fans tuned in because they felt connected to the outcome, to the rivalry, to the moment. Without that gravitational pull, Unrivaled struggled to define why it mattered. The basketball was there. The players were there. What was missing was the reason for casual fans to care. That's the gap the league still hasn't figured out how to close. Paige Bueckers keeps getting mentioned because she represents hope more than reality right now. Not because she isn't talented, but because the system around her hasn't shown it can elevate stars consistently. Fans don't attach themselves to potential. They attach themselves to moments that feel unavoidable. And until those moments are built organically, no single player can carry the weight alone. Expecting that to happen overnight only sets everyone up for disappointment. As negotiations approach, the timing couldn't be worse. Players want tangible progress reflected in contracts and benefits. Owners are staring at data that suggests interest is fragile and conditional. That disconnect shapes every conversation behind closed doors. Growth arguments weaken when recent performance contradicts them. And once leverage shifts, it's hard to get back. The league doesn't just need optimism heading into 2025. It needs proof. That's why next season matters more than anyone wants to admit. It will show whether the league can create sustained emotional investment without leaning on a single name to carry everything. If new narratives emerge and viewers respond, the story changes. If not, the decline continues quietly, measured in empty broadcasts and shrinking relevance. That's the crossroads women's basketball is approaching right now. If you've been watching this unfold and have thoughts on where the league goes from here, drop them in the comments. If this breakdown added clarity, hit like, share it with someone following the league closely, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next.